is false, so I will set it to true. And also, let's say I want to include formatted messages by setting this to true. So this takes care of my OpenTelemetry setup. Now, what about actually consuming this telemetry data? What is going to ingest it? Well, I'm going to give you two options, and then you can choose which one works better for you. And mind you, this is only going to be for local development. So let's go back to the Docker Compose YAML file, and I'm going to add two additional services. The first one is going to be a Seek instance. I will target this image, and I'm going to specify the versions explicitly rather than using latest, because this is going to safeguard me from any breaking changes. I also set up a volume for storing the Seek data, and I'm exposing the ports where we can ingest OpenTelemetry trace data. And then on port 8080, I'm going to expose the Seek user interface. The second option is going to be the Aspire dashboard running as a standalone component. And for this, I'm going to target the Aspire dashboard 9.0 image. I'm going to set an environment variable that's going to allow me to access the dashboard without authenticating because I'm running this locally. And I'm going to expose the dashboard port on my local system, which is this port here. Now, how is our API project going to export telemetry data to these two services? We can choose one of these two. We have to pass in some environment variables. So for the Seek service, these are the environment variables that you have to configure. So this is the OpenTelemetry exporter endpoint, which is where we are going to send the telemetry data. So I'm targeting the devhabit Seek URL, which is the name of the service inside of the Docker network. This is the internal port, and then the route which is accepting telemetry data. And in case of Seek, I have to use the HTTP protobuf protocol instead of gRPC. So if I start the application using Docker Compose and I open up my HTTP file where I set up this dummy request, let's go ahead and send a couple of requests so that we have something show up in telemetry. And then if you open up Docker Desktop, you should be able to see your free services that are currently configured. So we have our API instance, the Seek instance, and the Aspire dashboard. Let's navigate to the port localhost 8080. You will be greeted by the Seek dashboard, and here you can see some structured logs that are generated by our application. Now, if I navigate to the OpenAPI file and refresh this a few times, this should generate a couple of more traces. And if I go here and refresh this, you can see a couple of logs showing up, as well as some distributed traces, which you can find based on the timing information. So if you go inside, you can see the individual spans that are part of this trace. So this is how you can observe the structured logs and traces for your application using Seek. Seek is currently missing support for metrics, so this is a gap that the Aspire dashboard can bridge. If I go back to my Docker Compose YAML file and I comment out the environment variables that I have set for Seek, and then I'm going to add the setup that's required for Aspire. I'm setting the same environment variables, except the values are different. I'm using the URL where I can access the Aspire dashboard, and the port for ingesting telemetry data is this one here. Then I'm going to set the OpenTelemetry protocol to gRPC, and that's everything I need to do to switch from exporting my telemetry data to Seek into exporting my telemetry data to the Aspire dashboard. If you aren't seeing enough structured logs, what you can do is set the log level for the Microsoft ASP.NET Core namespace to information, and I updated this value in the app settings development JSON file. So let's go ahead and start the application again, and this time I will navigate to the Aspire dashboard. And this is the default view that I will see, containing my structured logs. Now, if I go into my OpenAPI file and refresh this a couple of times, you will see the structured logs are going to appear here once they are ingested by the Aspire dashboard. I can also observe my distributed traces, which contain some detailed information about this request that you can see here when you click on the specific span. And if I go into the metrics, I should be able to see any metrics that are exported, although this can take some time when you are running locally. And after a few moments, the metrics show up, so I can go ahead and observe the metrics that are exported by the ASP.NET Core instrumentation. So there you have it. This is two ways how you can observe your structured logs and distributed traces using the Aspire dashboard or Seek. And then you can also use the Aspire dashboard for observing metrics. So all of this should allow us to iterate faster when we start building our RESTful API. And one last thing I want to introduce is my CI/CD pipeline. For this step, I'm going to jump into VS Code because I want you to see the file hierarchy. This is my root folder of my repository, and my devhabit solution is inside of the dev habit folder. And here I have a .github folder with a workflows folder inside containing my build pipeline as a YAML file. So let me walk you through the individual steps in my build pipeline. I'm going to run this whenever I get a push to the main branch, and I'm going to build this using .NET version 9. I set this up as an environment variable. I'm going to run this on Ubuntu, which is a Linux distribution. It's going to be faster and cheaper when using GitHub Actions. My working directory is going to be dev habit, so that I can target my folder here. And then the steps inside are fairly straightforward. So let me close this down so that you can see the entire file. And what I have here is setting up the .NET SDK using the .NET version from the environment variable. Then I'm restoring my .NET solution, building it, testing it, and publishing my solution. And after this step, we could try to deploy this to some cloud environment. We will be doing that later on into the course, but for now, this should be enough to get some quick feedback when your build fails or one of your tests crash. I'm going to do one more thing before I actually push this to my GitHub repository, and that is update my gitignore file to ignore the /containers folder. This is where I am storing my volumes for the Docker containers. So with this in place, I'm going to push this into my repository. And if I open up my repository, you will see that my files have been uploaded. If I navigate to the Actions tab, I can go into the build pipeline that I have set up, which just contains a few simple steps: restoring the solution, building it, running any tests that we have, which we currently do not, but this is going to change later when we introduce testing, and we're going to publish this. So you can see that our build pipeline completes successfully. The total execution time was 29 seconds, and with this we are going to slowly wrap up this lesson. Now, a couple of remarks. If you don't want to use GitHub Actions, I will leave an equivalent build pipeline for Azure DevOps and possibly a few other CI/CD providers, because I don't want to assume that everyone will be using GitHub. And now that we have our base project setup completed, we can move into the next chapter in this course, where we are going to build our REST API, and I'm going to cover some best practices about designing REST APIs. We're going to start building our dev habit application, implement support for the most important HTTP methods, and we're also going to tackle some more advanced concerns like validation, reporting API errors using a standardized format. We're going to tackle pagination, data shaping, sorting and filtering, and a few other interesting topics.